Hello, I'm Lenina Rassool, your host on Mental Health Matters, where we sit down with a mental health expert every week to discuss all things mental health and more. And today we are speaking about child mental health. Historically, children were required to be seen and not heard. They were really asked about their feelings, and their emotions were not really acknowledged, even when really big things were happening. When things did happen, children were required to sit tight, to be good, to not say anything, and definitely not cry. But slowly and surely this narrative is shifting, and we are starting to look at children as little humans who require attention and emotional regulation. After the break, we are going to be sitting down with Edith Kriel, who is the Executive Director of Jelly Beans that works with children and also a social worker, to speak about what are the kinds of things that we need to be doing to regulate our children's emotions and also raise mentally healthy children. So before that, we are going to have a look at a short video about how to raise emotionally healthy children. Let's have a look.
As children, we don't just want to survive. We want to thrive and reach our full potential. All children need nurturing care from birth into adolescence. They need good health, good food, protection from harm, opportunities to learn, and caregivers who listen and respond to their needs. Children need healthy relationships with their friends and family, and families also need support to give children the best start in life. All children need to be protected from violence and abuse. No child should be beaten at home or bullied on the playground, and no child should have to witness violence on the streets or in their family. Clinics, schools, and youth groups need to work together to help children make healthy choices and to protect themselves from drugs and teenage pregnancy. Children who cannot read will struggle to learn, so we need to make time to read every day and make sure that children have books in the classroom and back at home. Schools and clinics should be child and family friendly, places where all children are treated with dignity and respect. Together, these 5 ingredients of nurturing care provide a strong foundation. They protect children from stress, and they help children to thrive and reach their full potential, so that they can do well at school, find a good job, and help build a stronger economy and a more caring society. The good news is that South Africa is working together with countries from around the world to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. These 17 goals aim to end poverty and hunger, improve children's health and education, protect the environment, and create a more peaceful and equal world. And by working together, we can protect the planet for future generations and make sure that no child gets left behind.
Welcome back. You're still watching Mental Health Matters, and we are speaking about child mental health. And joining us in studio is Edith Kriel, who is the Executive Director of Jelly Beans and is also a social worker. Edith, thank you so much for joining us.
It's awesome being here. Thank you for the invitation.
So Edith, I want to start with just the topic of child mental health because, you know, historically, and even as early as my generation, children were often seen and not heard. They were supposed to be shaped and molded and disciplined, and were really asked about their feelings and their emotions. And now there's a shift there. I just want to ask you, you know, is that shifting? Is it important for it to shift? How should we think about child mental health?
Well, I think it's important for us just to start thinking about children, and children are real human beings that are going to grow into hopefully healthy, functioning adults. You know, I think sometimes we forget that children are real little people. And I think there definitely is a shift, you know, for us to start or societies to start saying, hang on, we need to start paying attention to our children if we want healthy adults. You know, and they deserve and have the same kind of rights. I think there's still many places where children are still, you know, quiet and should be seen and not heard. You know, many families where feeling words aren't used, children aren't encouraged to use feelings or express feelings. You know, just be good. That's the requirement. So I think there is a shift in the right direction, but I think there's still a lot of work to be done for people to really start recognizing the importance of helping children learn about their feelings, express their feelings, learn how to deal with their feelings. There's still a lot of work for us to do.
I love that you describe them as little humans, and I think, you know, as I'm following some of these shifting narratives on social media, one of the things that often comes up is they say, you know, they are like they are small humans with the same feelings as you. They're basically not little adults, but they have the same feelings as us. And so start to contextualize that. And so they have feelings around certain things also, like when there is a divorce or when things are happening in the family. When we start to think about shifting to considering that they have emotions around these things and the emotions around these things are important, how should we be thinking about it? And should we be including them sort of in these types of discussions?
I think it's important, you know, children are not mini adults. So they're little humans.
Yes.
But there's lots of learning they still need to do. And learning about emotions is one of the things that they need adults' help with.
Yes.
So yes, they do have lots of different feelings. From kind of, if you think about a preschool age, sort of really happy, sad, angry, scared would be the sort of 4 basic feelings. And as they grow, they start to you know, experience more of the nuances of there's angry and rage and frustration and irritation.
Yes.
But it starts off really quite basic. And, but it doesn't mean that they can express it. They often show us in their behavior what they are feeling. And so what tends to then happen is if it's a happy feeling, we can deal with that. But if it's an angry one, a sad one, or a scared one, often the feedback that children get is those feelings are not okay because your behavior is frustrating or difficult or I don't know what to do with it. So what we need to do as adults is to start trying to help children find words for their feelings, and so that they can start to, when they're able to feel that feeling, start to be able to think, okay, there's a word for it.
Yes.
And that when I use that word and I try and explain to my mom, my dad, my granny, whoever, that I'm feeling this feeling, that they also are hearing it and listening to it. You see, that's the other side, is it doesn't help we just tell children and teach children about feelings if we're not going to listen to them. And generally, adults we've got a lot of learning to do in learning how to listen to children.
Yeah.
You know, because children don't speak the same language that we do. They speak behavior, they speak play. They don't speak words like we do. They're still learning all of those things. And so I think we as adults need to start thinking about, if I've got a little person in front of me, given their age, what might they be thinking? What might they be feeling? And therefore, what might be some of the behavior that I'm seeing? We talk about it as a concept, head, heart, hands. Nice, simple, easy.
Yes.
What might they be thinking? What might they be feeling? And therefore, what might they be doing in their behavior? And how then, as an adult, can I be bigger, kinder, wiser, stronger in helping hold this child together who might be having a meltdown or overwhelming big feelings?
I love that you said that, and you actually said it better than I did. When I said little adults, I wanted to try and say all the feelings that we experience, they also experience.
Yes.
And so trying to draw a link between that, and just because they are little doesn't mean that they don't feel frustrated or legitimately angry.
Absolutely.
Or all of those things, you know. And we obviously, as you said, we do have a language for it, and we feel like when we're legitimized in that. And then also just the way that you described now, that they don't have a language for it, so it comes out in their behavior. A friend and I were saying yesterday, sometimes with little kids, they don't know how to speak about their feelings, so when they say they have a tummy ache,
Yes. Exactly.
They also have a tummy ache or a headache, and you're not quite sure that maybe they're just having a really bad day, but they don't know how to speak about it.
Exactly.
Is it sort of those kinds of things?
It is those kind of things. So it might be having a meltdown. It might be, always having a tummy ache because I don't want to go to school because I'm being bullied, but I don't quite know how to say that. And then often also if I do say I'm being bullied at school, then it's kind of like, well, you go sort out the bully. And it's not quite that simple for kids. I think even, and I want to be very clear that when I talk about children, I'm including adolescents.
Yes.
Because sometimes I think when I say the word children, people think, little kids, but it's not.
Yeah.
Even adolescents struggle to express their feelings, and that's why they're listening to certain types of music when they're feeling certain emotions, because even they struggle to actually articulate and say, I'm feeling this. So just because they might have words doesn't mean they can always put the words and the feelings together. Because adolescents are often having big feelings, given the crises that adolescence brings.
Yeah.
I think we need to just really be thoughtful of. It's not always that easy to identify your feeling, to express your feeling, and to know how to deal with your feeling. And I kind of refer to adults as needing to be children's external hard drives in terms of these things. Children are not born with the knowledge of how to deal with this. And as adults, we need to help children grow in that. And if we help them, eventually it becomes an internal hard drive and we can plug out the external hard drive. But if they need an external hard drive, otherwise they're never going to learn how to internalize my feelings, expressing my feelings, and how to regulate my feelings. In other words, how to deal with them, that they are manageable.
And I love that you said that, because my next question was going to be, so how can we sort of hold space for our children and make space for their feelings? And one of the things that I learned recently, because I have an 8-year-old, and we try to speak about feelings a lot, but one of the things was sometimes just to sit with it. So when she says, I've had a hard day, or she's crying about something, no matter how minuscule it is, she burst out in tears the other day for a movie. But instead of being uncomfortable, just sitting there and say, oh, mornings are hard. Sometimes she really doesn't want to go to school. And just taking 5 minutes to sit with her and say, I know it's tough. Right? I know it's tough. I know I keep saying now, we're almost at the end of the year. It's the last stretch. You can just feel that very soon, as opposed to fighting against her, very soon, just that acceptance, she'll accept it and she'll get up and she'll be just better. Is that sort of, what are some of the ways we can do that?
So if I can kind of maybe use an example of a river, if we go with versus swimming against the current.
Yeah.
So in other words, instead of saying to her, you have to go to school, we all have to go to school, it's, I'm running late, just get over yourself. You took a couple of minutes to just be with and go with and say, it is tough. Sometimes I don't feel like going to work either. But just acknowledging and just saying, I'll sit with you for a little bit.
Yeah.
And I think that's the thing, is that we often don't stand still and reflect on what children are needing. And often it is just sitting with.
Yeah.
It's not fixing. It's, some of the feelings we can't fix. We'd love to fix them.
Yeah.
There's no magic plaster that fixes children's feelings, but by acknowledging them and showing children that we're trying to understand them, the feelings and their experiences, and that we're not afraid of that. Because often we give children the idea that your feelings are too big or too uncomfortable and I don't know what to do with them, so just keep them to yourself.
Yeah.
So rather, instead of fighting it, go with it in a way that's appropriate. And like you say, very soon, the response will be quicker than if you were trying to swim upstream. Her being able to kind of go, okay, it's something I have to do. Yep, and we'll count the sleeps until school is finished. So I think parenting, there is no magic formula. But I think what we do need to also bring into parenting is a little bit of fun, a little bit of creativity. So sometimes if a child is feeling angry, as an example, without being disrespectful, we can kind of say, sometimes when I feel angry, I feel like just stomping my feet real hard. Should we do a stomp? And we kind of go into a big stomp. And that just helps the child kind of dispel all of this physical feeling that's built up inside of them. And they've found a way in which they can use their bodies to deal with their feelings. And I think that's one of the interesting things that's happening in research around mental health at the moment, is how important movement is in learning to regulate feelings. So, if I think even from a counseling point of view, we were taught to sit across the, like this and chat to clients and, tell me about what you're worried about. But in some cases, that can be helpful. But in other cases, we may need to kind of move through the trauma or the issue, or, so sometimes moving with children, dancing with children, skipping, can just kind of break that moment also of, I'm just overwhelmed by this feeling. Well, let's kind of do something together. Or it might be, and this is where, as parents, we need to use our discretion. And if I can just clarify, when I'm talking about parents, I'm talking about caregivers.
Yes.
We have a lot of children who aren't with their parents.
Raised by grandmothers.
Exactly.
Or with family members.
Yep, absolutely. Or in child and youth care facilities.
Yeah.
So in some moments it might be just, pulling the child close and just holding them and hugging them, or just wrapping a blanket around, or humming a little lullaby. So I think we need to bring in some fun, and we need to bring in a little bit of creativity. I think, helping children navigate their world, we need to start saying the way maybe we were taught was not always as creative and as fun and as helpful as what it could have been. And the challenge for us is to say, okay, how can I do it differently?
Yeah. I love that you brought in sort of not jumping in to try and fix things, because we often do that. We're often giving sweets or lollipops and stuff, and those are also the ways that we were taught. One is shutting down, and the other one is sort of bribing the child to, or distracting the child, but just not being able to fix it, because I think some of the research in mental health, and as you were saying, just sitting with it, we have not really even been taught just to, one, sit with feelings, and that's a normal thing to do, and two, I love that you spoke about movement, and some of the things we speak about is emotions as energy. And that it needs to go somewhere, and if it doesn't go somewhere, that's when it starts to erupt. And so also to bring sort of more movement into, intentionally into our relationships. I wanted to also come to the fact that when we talk about mental health, and we talk about South Africa, and we talk about South Africa as a very violent country, and there's a lot of poverty, and there's a lot of issues. There is hunger. Our children, there are lots of people who have very serious challenges, including children. We've done shows already about just going to school in gang-ridden areas, and the amount of anxiety and lack of safety there. And so how do we start to think about mental health when we're thinking about that as the lived reality?
That's really tough, because if we just look at the brain and how the brain is structured, the brain is structured, its most basic form is survival, and people will do anything to survive. And sometimes that means stealing food. Sometimes that may mean hitting somebody over the head. All the things that are unacceptable, because they are, but at the same time, many of our children are in survival mode. And that means, sitting down and talking to them and trying to explain to them, and, they're not in the space where they can hear that, because their bodies are literally waiting for the next moment of violence, or the next clap over the head, or whatever it is. So I think we also need to understand that when we are in survival mode, we can't learn. And so we need to find ways in helping children to just be able to soften themselves and feel safe. And when children feel safe, they can learn, and we can teach about feelings, and we can maybe even begin to talk about feelings. But if you ask a child who is in survival mode, how are you feeling? You might, if you're lucky, you might get a one-word answer. You might, if it's an adolescent, get a swear word answer. Because in survival mode, language doesn't feature, verbal language. So it's really for us to start helping find ways in identifying, okay, this child is really overwhelmed right now. They're in survival strategy mode. How can I step in as an adult in an appropriate way to just help that child feel safe? And again, I come back to the concept of kinder, bigger, stronger, wiser. That's what children need from us.
How important is our energy when we are trying to calm the child? How important is it to look after sort of our own energy and move through our own feelings and feel that?
Well, I mean, I'm sure we could all think of examples of, where a parent is shouting at a child or smacking a child and saying, "Stop shouting at your brother."
Yes.
But
Can I just say that happened to me? So the kid was, we don't do physical discipline, but she was hitting.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember the one day I took her hand and I said, "Don't hit." And I was just blown away. I'm trying to teach her not to hit, but I'm hitting her. And so,
that's the thing.
So obviously that stopped.
That's the thing. So I mean, it's really interesting. I spoke about adults needing to be children's external hard drives. So what is that external hard drive teaching children about feelings and about dealing with feelings? What it's teaching them is that if you are bigger and louder and stronger, you're the one in charge. That's the whole dynamic of why we are not being able to deal with violence and stopping violence, is because our adults are not able to regulate their own emotions. And so when they're trying to deal with their children's difficult behavior, they are continuously over and over and over teaching children that it's about being, stronger and more powerful. That's how we sort out conflict. And so it really is about us starting to think about how do we also help our adults who are struggling with big emotions to learn how to deal with a child who is, when we are dysregulated, when we've got big emotions, we've had a tough day at work, there's stress, there's no food on the table, our children are crying, we also are overwhelmed. And so it is about saying, I need to just maybe take a step back and just ground myself, regulate myself. Otherwise, it is nearly impossible for me to regulate a child's behavior and feelings. But that's often the difficulty, is that we kind of come in with rage or frustration or whatever and are shouting and saying to children, don't do X or Y, but we ourselves aren't able to stick to our own rules.
Yes, and I think one of the things, I mean, if I may say, just being aware, and one of the things that has really helped me, because I could find that when I'm really overwhelmed, I've had a crazy day at work, I still need to go and finish some work at home. What could happen is that's when I'm snappy. That's when I can't take the 5 minutes to sit. That's when I'm not expelling my own negative energy. And if I just hear a whining noise or a pushback, I don't have the capacity to be able to create a safe space for her. And so I think that's the importance of looking at how our emotions are linked to their emotions and their emotional regulation. And I want to come back to emotional regulation and dysregulation, but we need to take a short break.
Great.
And we'll be back with more after this. Welcome back. You're still watching Mental Health Matters, and we are speaking about child mental health. And joining me and still with me in studio is Edith Kriel, who is the Executive Director of Jelly Beans and also social worker. And so, Edith, before the break, you mentioned dysregulation, emotional dysregulation. And we were speaking about, our emotions as caregivers and how that affects children and how it's important for us to be regulated so that we can help regulate them. But I want to come into the topic of emotional regulation and dysregulation, because I don't think a lot of us know what it is. It's sort of, it's new stuff coming out, new narratives coming out. So explain to us what that's all about.
So when we have big feelings, we often feel dysregulated, meaning we are overwhelmed, we don't have the words, sometimes our behaviors are out of sync with how we would normally be. So I kind of imagine sort of shark music playing in the background, like, the Doors music. There's just all of this stuff going on. And what we sometimes do is, we are like this. Whereas learning to regulate our feelings means we want to start being more like this. So that we're not in those extreme highs or extreme lows. Although we may experience them, the challenge for all of us is to start finding ways of saying, okay, this is what I'm feeling. Maybe I'm trying to think, why am I feeling this? But how can I just ground myself in the moment? And we spoke about movement just now. The other thing is breathing. Really learning to breathe and acknowledge I need to ground myself. So that when I've grounded myself, I can better ground or regulate my child's emotion.
I want to ask you about children,
Yes.
and feeling big feelings, being dysregulated. You said earlier before the break, children don't always have a language for their feelings, and they speak in behavior. There is a book called What Happened to You by Dr. Bruce Perry, and co-authored with Oprah, and he does a lot of work. The bulk of his work is around children, and I actually started learning about the nervous system and emotional dysregulation. And I just wanted to bring in, so when we're talking about feelings and we're talking about less appropriately perceived emotions like anger and frustration, and how that might manifest in what we've historically called naughty behavior. So now we're going to speak about naughtiness. When you say children speak in behavior, that means when they are being naughty, they are trying to send us a message. Dr. Bruce Perry, he says, the title of the book is often what we've always done is when a child is naughty or when they are acting out, we'll be like, what is wrong with you? So there's something wrong with this child. This child is inherently bad or naughty,
mad or sad
or something.
Yeah, something's wrong.
As opposed to taking a different approach and saying this child is acting out in this way because something happened to trigger it. A better way of approaching the child is what happened, asking the child what happened. I mean, is that a good way to think about it?
Absolutely, because it is about, children don't just have big emotions just to irritate us.
Yes.
They have
Even
big
though it
emotions.
feels like that sometimes.
It does, yes, it does. Especially when we're dysregulated and tired. Then we start to feel like, oh, she's just doing this on purpose. But children don't have meltdowns just to make you have a bad day. There's something that's triggered them. Sometimes we can figure out what it is. Children can maybe explain to us. But sometimes we might not quite understand, and children might not be able to explain to us what's brought on the meltdown. But what we know is there's a meltdown happening. So saying to the child, why are you angry? They're in survival mode. They can't give you that answer. So it is for us as adults to say, what might they be thinking? What might they be feeling? Where's the behavior coming from? Can I try and get some clues for myself rather than just children are naughty? Children are mischievous, and they're naughty, and any self-respecting child should be. They have to learn to push the boundaries because that's how they're going to learn where the boundaries are. But at the same time, so for me, that's mischief. But I think sometimes overwhelming feelings are seen as naughty or disrespectful. And that's not what they are. They're children who are showing us in their behavior, I don't know how to cope, I don't know what to do. And sometimes it might even be in language. Think of a teenager, who you've just had a big blowout with, and they go, I hate you.
Yes.
But it doesn't necessarily mean that they hate you as in how we think about it. It's just in that moment, their feelings were so big, that's all the words that could come out. If you could sit down with them in a calm space, you could unpack all of that and unravel that and kind of go, okay, let's talk about what happened. But sometimes when we hear that I hate you, it's immediately, what a disrespectful child. And then we respond in a disrespectful way. Again, we're reinforcing what we're trying to teach out of our children.
I want to ask you about that because it's not just teenagers. Very little kids can also shout, I hate you. And we experience this. And I did want to bring in, a psychologist then once told me, when your child says, I hate you, because this is also speaking about behavior and providing and their perceptions of safety. So what she said is when your child says, I hate you, it's not that it's a good thing for the child to do, but it's a way to also think about it is that they feel safe enough saying that to you. And what this could often mean is that is an understanding that we are not going to completely reject them for saying that. It almost means that we are the safe space for them to be able to act out. And so it was very interesting. My sister and I had our kids at the same time, and we would go out. When we come back, they'd just be extremely needy, mischievous, and my mom would be like, they were fine when you weren't here.
Yep.
Is it also, is that, and so I really liked the frame of thinking, okay, she feels, the fact that she feels able to act out with me means that I'm a safe space for her. How important, and you mentioned earlier when children feel safe, how important is it for us to create a safe space? And I'm thinking about us being cognizant of our responses to children when they act out.
The most important thing for children to grow up into healthy adults is to feel safe and loved. It's, I kind of want to say as basic and as hard as that. Because children cannot explore all of themselves if they're feeling unsafe, if they feel, if I say the wrong thing, dad and mom will get into a fight and dad will leave and I won't see dad again. How can they express what they're feeling or what they're thinking in that kind of an environment? So safety, and I don't mean physical safety, I mean emotional safety.
Yeah.
And really for children to know that even if sometimes I'm badly behaved, my mom or dad might not like my behavior.
Yes.
It doesn't mean that they don't love me.
Yes.
And that's often where we blur the lines. We let children think, because of your bad behavior, I don't love you. And those are two separate things. We often don't like what our partners are doing, or our parents are doing, or the man on the street is doing. But behavior is separate from my child. I will love unconditionally, even if I don't always like their behavior.
And so that's interesting, because I did want to ask you about language and how important it is. And so even just to jump onto that, is to ask, should that reflect in our language when we're speaking to them? Because again, coming back to the things we say is, you are naughty, what's wrong with you? And this is also emerging, and that those types of phrases are very damaging, because it makes the child think that there's something wrong with them. They take it very literally.
Absolutely. And I think if I think about our country, corporal punishment has been banned, rightly so. The difficulty is that it has left a vacuum for parents in terms of how to discipline and guide their children. Because in the past, that was the form of discipline. And I use the word discipline carefully, because discipline to me means guiding with love. I don't mean physical discipline. But so it's left this vacuum where parents are saying, I don't know how to guide and discipline my child. And so what used to be the weapon previously, which was the hand, has now become the tongue. So we say things to children now that are as hurtful or even more hurtful than, or long-term hurtful than maybe the smack on the bum would have been. Ask many children who've maybe had a smack, they would say, I'd rather that my mom smacks me than my mom says she's disappointed in me. So we also need to think about the things that we say. Our tongue can be a weapon as well. And particularly, I think sometimes as women, our tongue can be very dangerous weapons. And those are things, we can all think of examples of where somebody said something to us when we were young, and how even still today we remember that.
Yeah.
And how it shaped us and influenced us and maybe made us believe that we are that. So, words are important, and kids don't understand nuances of words, the little meanings in words. So we need to be thoughtful that I might say something, but I might need to clarify it or really explain it in a way that a 4-year-old is going to understand. Because I'm thinking as an adult, I'm assuming that you understand what I'm saying, but kids don't.
So even just assuming, I'm angry and whatever I've said, and so, but of course I love you, because my parents love their children, and I just said that, and Which brings me to, one of the things I wanted to ask about is, okay, so we have had a bad day. We are dysregulated. Maybe the kids are also dysregulated. It's a chaotic day in the household, and we snap. Mm-hmm. We say something, and there are moments we immediately feel bad afterwards. We know that, I wanted to ask about a concept around correcting. So we've done it, we can't take it back. What should we do?
Well, it's interesting. When children fight and we try and sort out the fight between children, what do we expect them to do? We say to them, go and say sorry.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's what we do. But it's interesting, adults don't generally say sorry to kids when they've made a mess of things. And so for me, it's simple. If I've made a mess of something, which I will inevitably do, I'm a human, I can go and say I'm sorry. Mm-hmm. And maybe try to explain why that happened and that it wasn't right. And I'll try and do better. Or, and I think that's, I'm always fascinated in how the rules are different for kids than what they are for grown-ups. Mm. We can behave however we want to, but children can't. Yeah. No, it's not like that. So, yes, we need to learn, if we've messed something up, to apologize to children. And find a way of trying to make it right, because the hurt is still there. Mm. So one of the things that I also try and help parents look at when children are saying things or doing things that they shouldn't be doing, particularly when we're using words, is to give children feedback and say, when you say it like that, it's really hurtful. Mm. I don't like it. It makes me feel bad. Would you like a do-over? So when we give children feedback and say, this is how it makes me feel or think, okay, just take a moment, think about it. Would you like a do-over? Do you want to try again? Mm. And because then we're giving children an opportunity to learn versus shouting at them and saying, that was a really ugly thing that you said, and that's the end of that. Yeah. And that's not helpful, because how then does the child learn how to now do it differently in a better kind of way? So do-overs are really a useful way of teaching children. And sometimes we need to do do-overs.
Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, I love the concept of a do-over and giving ourselves another chance. Edith, we're talking a lot about sort of the, regulation and managing all of this stuff. I want to, because we speak about mental health also, if we don't, if the structures are not in place for the child to feel safe, if there is lots of dysregulation, there are no corrections, if it's a chaotic household for whichever reasons, what are the implications of that for children? Obviously, children grow up to become adults, and so all of these things that they experienced earlier is going to affect their behavior and their decisions and how they are later on. But I also want to tag onto that. Could they have, adverse effects when they're young? Can children suffer from depression?
So children are little humans, and in a similar way to us, they can suffer from mental health issues. And in fact, currently, 1 in 10 children in our country could be classified with a clinical diagnosis, like depression, like anxiety. I'm not saying that that's a helpful way of looking at it, but what I'm saying is that children have mental health issues. And what we need to be thinking about is, if we don't intervene, if we don't find strategies as families, as communities, to be saying this is real and this child needs help, we are, sure, the consequences are huge for the child, for the family, for the society, for the budget that they put together in government in terms of mental health services. Because what we know is people who suffer with mental health and don't get the support that they need at that time often become physically ill as they grow. So not just mental impact, but physical impact. So we need to take this seriously. And post-COVID, we've seen a spike in all of the things that are traumatic for children. Violence, domestic violence, rape, online, they land in cyberspace, in seeing pornography.
Lots of death.
Lots of death. We've had thousands of children who've been orphaned as a result of COVID. Where are they? Who's speaking to them?
Yeah.
Who's holding them? Who's saying to them it's okay sometimes not to be okay? It's okay to miss your mum. You know, where is that grief? That grief for most of the children is just buried inside, and another layer and another layer and another layer is put on top of it because we don't encourage children to share. You know, if you think about it as a baby is crying. What our instinctive thing is we want to respond appropriately so, and we shush them.
Yeah.
But there's many things we do in the process of trying to shush, and I mean soothe them. Okay. You know, we move, we sing, we pat, we stroke, we hold. Those are the kinds of things that we can recreate for children that are so helpful for their mental health, and that you and I and every one of us can do. We don't need the psychologists and the only 15 child psychiatrists that are left in mental health government services. 15 child psychiatrists for our whole country.
So even if we wanted to go and get mental health services, they are not enough.
They're not accessible. We, as families and communities, need to say, what can we do? And again, it's as simple and as hard as loving and caring and keeping children safe.
I mean, that's so profound when we think about it. And I love that you brought in loving and caring, because also in Dr. Perry's book, there was he admits, Evan, he didn't think it was such a huge area until he met a house mother who counseled through love and through touch. And a part of his thing was also just that. Touching is helping to regulate. Taking 5 minutes and just holding them and rocking them and the same kind of things.
Exactly.
But essentially what we've become used to is, and I think especially with boys, because boys are not supposed to cry, those messages are still sort of perpetuated all the time. My daughter will often say, I can't stop crying. And I'll be like, it's okay, because it's okay to feel that sadness. And so I think one important thing that's coming through for me from this is also our ability to tolerate those emotions, and to still, sit with them with it, but also to be able to tolerate and to think about crying as normal, anger as normal.
Sometimes when children are having big feelings, we are either so irritated with it that we respond inappropriately, or sometimes we're so uncomfortable with it.
Yeah.
You know, if I think as a mom, I want to make things better for my child. And there's some things that I can do to make it better, but sometimes I can't make it better in the moment.
Yeah.
And then I do need to tolerate and sit with and be with and hold and sing. You know, it's interesting. So, I mean, I obviously work with a lot of children who've got mental health difficulties. And it's interesting, we've got a little book in our playroom that has lullabies, and how when children start moving towards talking about their traumatic experiences, they will often go to the shelf and go and fetch that lullaby book.
Oh, wow.
And ask me, they will put on the song and ask me to sing for them. Now, I didn't go to university to sing. I mean, I sing terribly. I was never taught at university about touching and singing and holding and loving. And it's as simple and as hard as that.
Edith, we need to take another short break.
Yes.
But we will be back with more after this. Welcome back. You're still watching Mental Health Matters, and we're almost at the end of the show, but not yet. And with us still in studio is Edith Kriel, who is the Executive Director of Jelly Beans and a social worker. And so we've been speaking about child mental health, and we've covered a lot, Edith. I want to come in and just say, come back to that question about sort of our exposure to violence and how that affects us. And we haven't even gone deeply into sort of trauma, because there's that. But, I had a conversation recently about corporal punishment in schools, which is illegal, but still does happen. And one of the things that came up, which I'm going to ask you to speak to in sort of a broader context, is even the act of witnessing violence affects children. And how I thought about that in the broader context is like, perhaps my parents are not violent,
Yeah.
but our neighbors do.
Exactly.
Right? And so there's violence at the school when kids are playing. I'm not the one being bullied, but I'm witnessing bullying at the school. And so I just want to get some context from you on the effect of, is there also a deep effect on children when they are witnessing violence?
So the interesting thing is that how our brain works is that whether I am the one who's been directly impacted by the violence, so I'm being hit, or whether you are witnessing me being hit, the same parts of my brain that are being activated to deal with the situation are being activated in your brain, even though you are not the direct victim. So you are a secondary victim, but the same parts of your brain are being activated. So it feels in your brain as if you are also being hurt and hit, and you are also afraid.
Oh, wow.
So, violence is not just about what happens directly to me, but it's everything that is around me. It has an impact. And we really are only beginning to understand how profound that impact is now. The more we're beginning to understand the neurobiology of the brain and how that gets impacted by trauma. So I think in the next years we're going to learn so much. But what we know is that trauma and violence, whether I'm the primary recipient or a secondary observer, impacts what's happening in my brain, and therefore impacts how my brain grows and how my behavior changes and how my mental health is impacted.
Wow. And just to follow on from that and to ask you for last words, because we're almost at the end, I just wanted to ask you, so I wanted to ask you just like, how do we mitigate that? I wanted a round off of some of the stuff we've spoken about is how do we create a safe environment within the context of our circumstances for our children, knowing that we can't completely lock them up, lock them away. They're going to see it. They don't see it at home. They might see it at school. Things are going to happen. And then also, so, how do we mitigate this exposure to these things? And also, how important is it for us to speak about it? And I just want to say, when we're speaking about violence, we're speaking about the bullying, and we're speaking about the experience of that, what is coming up for me also is that there's a lot of unfairness in the world. How it's important. Often they'll see a teacher beating a child and or trauma happen and there's no justice.
Yes.
We speak about that largely within gender-based violence, but there is no justice. They see no consequence. And I'm sure that also affects them very much. And so can we, through speaking to them, or can we in some way mitigate that for them? Do we need to speak to them about it?
So, yes, we need to be our children's go-to person. That's the best way in which we can protect our children from violence. So even though we can't protect them from the world out there that they are going to go into, they can come back into a safe space. And they can come back, and as their go-to person, they can come and tell me anything. And we can try and process that. So the smaller the child, the less they're able to put it into words. So they might play it out. So when, the Barbie doll is being hit over the head by the teacher, we shouldn't just say, oh, that's children playing. Maybe we should just kind of have a look at what's going on in this play, because that's children's language. And play is children's language up until about the age of 10, 11. Okay,
Wow.
So let's be our children's go-to people, the safe space that they can come back to, because there is a lot of stuff happening out there, but they can come back to us, and we can always be thoughtful of being bigger, kinder, wiser, stronger, because it's in that way that we can help our children get through, learn, grow, develop, and blossom.
I love that, and I love about being their go-to person and just bringing up sort of all of those safe things. And then just to reiterate, okay, because we were speaking about part of that is also being present, being aware, and then lots of love. You mentioned just before we go, a few strategies around a few practical things people can do for emotional regulation. I just wanted to run through that again. So even in your practice, you spoke about singing and movement.
Yes.
Are there things we can do with our kids if we see they're in an emotionally dysregulated state?
Yes. So it is often those things that think back to how you would soothe a baby. So we use rhythm, we use movement, we walk up and down that passage many times with our babies. So swinging, for instance, is a very, very rhythmical, soothing thing for children. You could use a blanket, and you could swing a bigger child. So rhythm, movement, especially if it's repetitive kind of movement, if possible, dance, song, breathing, touch. Yeah. Those are the things that we can fall back on if words fail us and clever ideas and creative ideas fail us. In fact, those basic things are much more powerful than all the words in the world.
Yeah. And I love that. And you said earlier also, often when there's an issue, and not to say that we shouldn't, but the first thing we often do. So when you were saying that, what came up for me, actually, if I may share with you in the audience, is that, the first thing we think is that we need to run to the experts and that we don't know anything and that there's nothing that we can do. But actually knowing that love and care and rocking and swinging and singing lullabies is actually the foundation of good mental health. Those are free things that all of us can do consistently to build a strong and emotionally healthy child.
Yes. I think the one challenge for many of our adults is that they need to learn how to speak play again.
Yeah.
So I think that's one challenge. So our adults need to learn to play again. But yes, those are all things that we can be doing, and that's accessible. And what's interesting is that when we engage in that with our children, we start to feel better too.
Yes. Although I will say it's really frustrating to play Barbies with a very young child because they want to control everything and I have to be either the male or the bad guy most of the time. Edith, we're out of time. Thank you so very much for joining us. This was a wonderful conversation and we learned so much.
Great. It was lovely being here.
And that brings us to the end of Mental Health Matters for today. I'm Lenina Rassool. Thank you so much for joining us. Goodbye.